Can't reach net zero without oil and gas. I deal with the world as it is. And the world as it is that Canada is the fourth biggest producer of oil in the world. It's net zero emissions by 2050. It is making sure that our economy continues to grow and prosper, not hold it back. And then three, make sure no one gets left behind. And you owe people the respect of saying, you know, we are going to look after you through this. We're going to figure this out together. But we have to have greater empathy for one another in this country. We're a big country.
This question is like, what was your opinion of our letter, just in a bit more detail?
That we can't reach net zero without oil and gas. I said that very early on when I became minister. You know, for those of you who don't know it, Newfoundland and Labrador relies more on oil than Alberta does. A lot of the challenges that have been felt in Alberta and Saskatchewan have been felt out here. It's a different industry, of course, because it's offshore. It's a lot more capital intensive at the outset. I mean, I was there for the launch of the Hebron oil platform when they brought it out. And that's a $15 billion platform. We landed on this island just to fish.
Yep.
And suddenly we couldn't fish. And it's one of the biggest environmental disasters ever. It's the world's single largest source of protein. North Atlantic cod disappeared within a generation because we found an industrial way to fish it. And we didn't take conservation into consideration. So then it was, and as it happened, oil was coming on board at the same time. And so that has sustained us, you know, but it's going through massive challenge as much as it is with in Alberta and in Saskatchewan. And I always remind people of this, and everywhere in the world that produces energy is going through a massive amount of tumult. You know, North Dakota is the same, Texas is the same. Pennsylvania is the same, and they're about to go through a lot of the challenges that we've gone through in the past 4 or 5 years. You know, particularly under our government, I would argue, because we've been trying to take a lot of this stuff head on, and it's been disruptive. They're about to go through that now, the Americans. And listen, and hats off to them, because I mean, who here doesn't want to combat climate change? We all do. It's a matter of how we do it, and how we make sure we include everybody. And that's my big thing, is making sure that everybody is included, and that we concentrate not on any particular industry per se, like these are the bad guys, but everybody's got to lower emissions. And that's how we become more competitive.
The students indicated that during the survey, a lack of energy literacy, a balance in the media, and an open discussion are contributing to energy polarization.
Yeah. So
regarding this, how do we bridge East and West narratives about energy, and how do we move forward and work towards reducing polarization?
If you grow up on this island in the middle of the North Atlantic, with its sublime weather, and I also grew up in a small town in Labrador for a lot of my childhood, and you learn to be very practical. You learn to take on the world as it is. You know, I'd say I've never been able to afford ideology. I deal with the world as it is. And the world as it is that Canada is the fourth biggest producer of oil in the world. It is our biggest export. We have gotten damn good at it. We have managed to get oil out of sand. That's amazing.
Which is incredible, yeah.
We have managed off here. President of ExxonMobil Canada, and they're headquartered here in St. John's, he told me that there's no harsher environment that ExxonMobil operates in the world than offshore Newfoundland. With the Keystone, I mean, there's an argument I made in Parliament the other night. My first thought is of people who are working on this or could be working on this. That's about 1,000 people right now, you know, and it'll be more. In indirect jobs, it could be more. We need those people. In Newfoundland, we're used to seeing really talented people leave here and go to other parts of Canada or around the world, especially with this industry. But we need these people to lower those emissions. We need that ingenuity. We need that hard work. We need that determination that created, you know, in this harsh environment here, a thriving offshore oil industry. And that through, you know, Alberta and British Columbia created the fourth biggest producers of oil in the world from sand. I often say it's not black or white, nor is it black and green, you know. It's the muddied middle. I mean, that's where I live. That's where I've always lived, dealing with the real world, dealing with reality. I've never been able to afford ideology. I've never been able to just be myopic and say, okay, this is how it's going to be. And solar panels and wind turbines will magically appear tomorrow. They won't. They need to, all these things need to be built. And there are pluses and minuses to all of them. What I've said from the beginning is that my mind is wide open, which is why I've been a big proponent of nuclear and small modular reactors and their promise, because they're zero emission. Nuclear was a huge help in Ontario having clear skies and clear streets, and Ontario nuclear played a huge part in that, right? It's zero emission.
A student from Nova Scotia Community College asked, what can be done to encourage young people's literacy about natural resources? So what you're talking about. So how can the government help young individuals to become more energy literate?
If it was as easy as the government should just go out there and say stuff, you do it, but it's not, because there are a lot of people say that's the liberals. You can't trust them. On one side, they're saying, look at us, they're proponents of KXL, they're pro-oil, and on the other side, they're saying they're anti-oil.
Yeah.
You'll see in us what you want to see. And that's tough. So it's kind of doing what you're doing. It's asking the questions and getting people together and talking. Daniel, even your point, the media is polarized. The news that I read in the Edmonton Sun is going to be very different than what I read in the Globe and Mail. I think, having been a journalist, most journalists are out there to find the truth. We all live in our own environments, and we all are subject to, just because of who your friends and neighbors are, and where your family's working, if you're living in Alberta, you will have a very different view, and in some cases maybe a more realistic view than you will in other parts of the country. It's very difficult to substitute for proximity. I mean, if I look out the window here in my office, I see supply vessels heading out to the offshore. They're moored just underneath my office here.
Yeah.
I am reminded every single day of the importance of the industry to this province. And so people here are reminded. If it's a small province and everybody knows somebody who's working in the industry, that doesn't mean that you're closed-minded. It just means you have an appreciation for the world as it is.
And so there's one student, Graham, from Dalhousie University, and he was asking, what are you doing to ensure every Canadian has access to Canadian energy? An example, allowing people from Nova Scotia or Quebec access to oil and gas produced in Western Canada. Would you consider an energy corridor a viable solution instead of importing foreign oil into Nova Scotia?
We own TMX, but we want to sell it. I don't really think the government should be in the business where it can help it of owning pipelines. So you wait for a proponent to come forward. I think what we have worked really hard on, and it has not been easy, and is, we've taken a lot of flack for it from everybody, is process. And process for us was Bill C-69, which is now the Impact Assessment Act. Again, I come back to, I live in the world as it is. On environmental considerations, and particularly on Indigenous consultation, we weren't doing a good enough job. And projects weren't getting built because they were going to the courts, and the courts were saying, sorry, not up to snuff. So the whole point of C-69, which some people say unnecessary red tape and anti-oil, we just went, this stuff's just going to keep going to the courts unless we get it right. Plus, it's the right and proper thing to do to consult Indigenous people on development that affects their land. That's just the right thing to do. But the courts are saying, you have to do it, and are getting more prescriptive in how we do it.
Yeah.
So let's incorporate that in law. Let's have a defined timeline that we agree upon, that isn't, constantly getting extended and extended and extended. So then investors who come to Canada go, okay, so this is the timeline. So you're saying if I do all this consultation in this way up front, there's a far greater certainty that my project will get built. And what we can say now, after all the blood, sweat, and tears of that process, is yes. And we had a significant decision a couple of years ago on TMX, where what we had done to consult with First Nations and Métis communities wasn't enough. We went back, we got a retired Supreme Court Justice, Frank Yakabuchi, and a whole bunch of ministers, and we all sat down. I was Minister of Indigenous Services, and okay, let's work out this thing. I mean, how do we, what do we have to do? Does this work? And we brought that back to the Federal Court of Appeal, and unanimously they said, yeah, okay, that works. Legislation works. And if we go about the consultation in this way, nobody has a veto here. It's just a matter of, are you coming to the table and making reasonable accommodation? Are you being reasonable about it? Because I can tell you, someone who grew up in the North and knows Indigenous communities growing up, but also as a minister, they've had enough of somebody walking in with a clipboard and going, yeah. It's insulting.
Yeah.
You know, it's grossly insulting. And people wonder why you have that passion from some First Nations that are saying, we're not being treated like that anymore. This is my land. You know, my grandmother's buried over here. Like, you can't do that. Right. Yeah. And then just don't call me anti-development. Sweeping judgments about Indigenous peoples. They're anti-development. You guys, I think, know in Alberta, they are not, but some are. Yep. And they are as different in their opinions as we are, around their own tables at home. And I have addressed the Assembly of First Nations gathering of chiefs when they're all together. And you know, it's a brawl on the floor on the issue of development. One chief will take the mic and they are yes, another one takes the mic and they are no. No. And most of them are kind of in between, you know, make a reasonable argument. Tell us why we should buy in. Mm-hmm. Make a good deal.
Students did have questions regarding Keystone XL, but with the recent decision, will your government expand relationships with other countries, energy relationships with other countries, and then vocally advocate for additional hydrocarbon export?
Yeah, I mean, we will most definitely be making the argument. I mean, the environmental, social, governance standards for our oil in Canada is the best in the world, confirmed by Yale, confirmed by the World Bank. It further makes the case for TMX. It further, makes the case for, customer diversification. Crude oil is our number one product in Canada, and 98% of it goes to one customer. That customer has changed in its attitude and in its priorities and values demonstrably. And it says a lot that, that this is one of the first acts of Joe Biden on the day that he was inaugurated. Now, I'll tell you, we could see it coming.
Yeah.
He had made that promise emphatically. He was vice president when President Biden had made that decision before. So we knew they were serious, and we sat down and did the work. The government of Alberta and the government of Canada worked long and hard together. I've had meetings with the Premier, but regularly, like at least weekly meetings with the Energy Minister in Alberta, Seamus Savage.
Yeah.
Frankly, this industry is way too important to play to politics with it too much, to be honest with you. I know it's political. But the way I work is, it's the long, hard slog behind the scenes. We worked very, very hard. Our embassy and Alberta's representative in Washington, who I know, James Rashad, worked hand in glove. The Premier, up until a week and a half ago, was saying, he was very happy with the level of cooperation between our governments. The President decided he would keep his commitment, and there we are. And that's, I was brutally disappointed. I found out early because where I live, 3.5 hours east of you, I had to call Minister Savage and Minister Bronwyn in Saskatchewan and say, I wasn't sure how early they got up because usually our calls are in the evening, but I had to make the very somber phone call that we had worked very hard, but the Americans are going this way.
Another thing that students were wondering was if imported energy is currently or will be held to the same ESG environmental standards as Canadian produced energy. Just as an example, will producers of imported energy resources be taxed or held to the same Canadian standard?
We have been making this argument long and hard, and I would say, Sky, that overwhelmingly now, and I mean in the past year particularly, the overriding consideration is emissions. It's blowing everything else out. That is what investors are looking for. They are no longer turning a blind eye. I mean, we have made the argument consistently in this country about comparing, our oil, termed ethical oil, against Saudi Arabia, other countries. The market did not move as much as we would have liked it to. And, these are private sector investors making these decisions, right?
But how about importing the oil into Canada? Importing those resources, would there be a carbon tax or a clean fuel standard applied to imports coming in?
I think we're very open to talking to the Americans about all sorts of things right now. We have an administration that I think is very closely aligned to our values. The Europeans are looking at something along those lines, instead of just importing products generally that are they're not up to European standards in terms of emissions, then why are you harming those industries within your jurisdiction, within Europe in this case, who are making those investments? I'm not going to jump the gun on it, but I mean, I would say like Standard & Poor's, the ratings agency that, will determine how much and at what rate you will borrow money by giving, today just put 12 major oil companies on hold.
Yeah.
They may downgrade them. This will cost them billions of dollars. I just saw this report come in about an hour ago. Suncor is on a suspend list. But all the other majors, BP, Shell, ExxonMobil, all the big ones are now being told, if you don't come back to us, Standard & Poor's is, a private sector ratings agency on debt. If you don't come back to us with a plan pretty soon, we could downgrade. Whenever you can see the market move, the market is the most sustainable route for change. I believe that, rather than government tripping over itself trying to get it right. When investors move, they move quick, and they are moving very quickly. We could see this a year ago with decisions like big private equity firms like BlackRock, that they were moving, that they were demanding, a higher standard. And the picture I would illustrate for you guys, because sometimes it's people your age who are making these decisions. They're young bucks. They get hired by these great companies. They're in New York, they're in London, they're in Zurich. They're around a boardroom table, and their boss, probably younger than me, but still my age, and he's at the end of the table saying, "Hey, Sky, Daniel, what are we doing? What are we doing on climate change?" And the problem, Zurich, London, whatever, these guys are just saying, "Oh, we're divesting Canadian oil from our portfolios." That is a very dangerous place to be, because these people your age, fresh out of MBA school, big universities, living in these big cities, are making big decisions, billions of dollars on that tick. Mm-hmm. So refurbishing Canada's reputation is really, really important. Getting that word out is very important. We try and do that all the time. But for those Daniels and guys that are making those decisions, looking over on the other side of the ledger, they're looking for that grade, that level that says, okay, that country's serious about climate change. And that is now, we were thinking, my language a year ago was, it is increasingly net zero. That's what investors are looking for. That is now the grade. It is net zero. Yeah. If you are a country, company, province that is not committing to net zero, in effect, in a meaningful way, investors aren't going to go near you. This is, very important that we get this right, because the money moves quickly.
And that ties into another question that we got from a student from Memorial University.
Fine university.
Yes. And why is the current government so reluctant to put in place supports for oil and gas companies, such as tax incentives and expedited processes, etc., to encourage new exploration and drilling, like what we're seeing in Norway?
One of the biggest obstacle wasn't further incentive, financial incentive by the government for further exploration on our offshore. Mm-hmm. The biggest issue was regulatory. It was taking about 300 days to do an environmental assessment. So basically, I want to drill just an exploratory well, which is pretty simple, right? Dig it into the ocean floor. Generally, it's pretty clean cut. You go down, you see what's down. Now, you got to make sure that you do your due diligence, and then environmental, everything. So it was about 300 days. And then government before us brought in a Environmental Assessment Act that didn't take into account Newfoundland. And these exploratory wells were being treated like full projects, like Hebron.
Yeah.
So suddenly it was taking 900 days for that one exploratory well, which is crazy. I mean, it's 60 to 90 days in Norway and the UK, which are our biggest competitors here, right? So what we did was, because we have Bill C-69, we could go out and do a comprehensive environmental assessment of the whole basin out there. So a whole ecosystem, instead of doing one, and that would take 900 days, and then you'd have another one 5 kilometers away, and that's another 900 days. I mean, it was just stupid. I mean, it's not how government's meant to work, right? I mean, make fun of government. That was probably one of the worst examples I could see. By doing this regional assessment, we call it, we could look comprehensively at how different ecosystems in that basin work together. And by doing it comprehensively, it took us a year. Now we've brought it down from 900 days to 90 days. So now we are completely on par with the UK and with Norway. And industry told us that was the biggest impediment to further exploration was all the time's money. By being smart about this, we're more competitive, and we're actually going to do a better job on the environment because we have a far greater understanding of how all these ecosystems work together.
Over like the last 5 years, like as students, we watched well over like $200 billion in investments in the resource sector pull out of Canada. What are you doing to ensure growth and jobs within the energy sector now and within the future?
I think we are all going through so much change in our lives right now, and there's so much tumultuousness out there. I mean, everything's kind of turned upside down between COVID, the economy, and especially in energy jurisdictions like mine and yours. I don't say transition, I just say lower emissions. So we got to lower emissions. This is not going to be easy. It is because I think our mission is threefold. It's net zero emissions by 2050. It is making sure that our economy continues to grow and prosper, not hold it back. And then 3, make sure no one gets left behind. And when I'm thinking primarily of energy workers, of oil and gas workers, of provinces like mine and yours, that we don't just say, well, no, enough of that now, we're just going to go build some windmills. And it's not that easy. It is not that easy. And you owe people the respect of saying, we are going to look after you through this. We're going to figure this out together. We need to make sure that we get that right, that inclusive, looking after workers particularly, because we need them. Back to my point, who built the offshore here in Newfoundland? Who built the oil sands? And in effect, with the wealth that we have generated from these projects, who are building? These are the people who are building our country. We make sure that we keep them and use them in this industry to lower emissions. Like I said to you, the same work ethic, the same determination, the same ingenuity to lower emissions. We did a number of things, but particularly for Alberta, Saskatchewan, and BC, we said, what's working right now is looking after orphan and inactive wells. We got to clean them up. Let's clean them up now. It's a very technical business that requires people with experience and expertise. And that's putting tens of thousands of Albertans and Saskatchewanians and British Columbians back at it. And we need them. Yeah. We need them to do that. Plus, it's good for the environment and it keeps them in the industry. Here, we created 2 funds, about $400 million for the offshore here. The Premier here in Newfoundland and Labrador created a council made up of workers, made up of industry, and made up of some government officials to sit around and pick out, working with the major oil companies, pick out the projects that would adhere to those 2 guidelines. That's getting people back to work and keeping momentum in the industry, lower emissions, and look after one another.
Back to a comment that we were talking about pipelines, and that the government's not really going to give money to support, not support that, but give money to oil companies directly give money to oil companies. But is there kind of
we did with TMX, we bought it.
Into maybe helping out companies for carbon sequestration and getting the technology in place with federal support?
The answers will likely come from the private sector, but we can incent that. You know what I mean? We can invest, we can incent that. We can, and that's what we're doing, and that's what you're going to see us do more of. Carbon capture is critical. Saskatchewan has got some projects going. They're world leader. Alberta is thirsty. They want to catch up, and so do we. Because it's key for a number of reasons. First of all, the important thing to remember about net zero is the word net. So you can you'll have emissions. You'll always have emissions.
Yep.
How do you account for those emissions, and how do you make sure that you achieve net zero, which is what we want to do. Carbon capture is one of the ways that will allow us to do that. It's still a relatively new technology, and so we got to get busy on that now, and I think that you will see us get busy on that. The Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister are very keen on getting us more involved in carbon capture. It's vital. It's also vital not just for lowering emissions, but it's also vital in hydrogen, and we think hydrogen is big. So there's the ultimate is green hydrogen, which is still expensive. And green hydrogen is basically when you're able to derive, hydrogen using a renewable fuel source. So, in Quebec, it'll be hydropower, right? And we see big promise for green hydrogen in Quebec. But until the market prices it at a place where it's affordable for most people, blue hydrogen could be it, which is where we use natural gas. But we want to make sure that we don't just throw the carbon into the atmosphere, that we're able to sequester it. That will be blue hydrogen. When we create hydrogen now, it's gray hydrogen in that we're emitting into the atmosphere. That's not what we want. So blue will be more of an answer in the short to medium term, I think, for Alberta, Saskatchewan, possibly Newfoundland as well. And then, as we get closer and closer, it'll become green. And, even speaking yesterday with the energy minister in Alberta, she's very keen on it's kind of a proximity thing. If we can get hydrogen close to the oil sands, then they can use more hydrogen in extracting oil, right? Now, a lot of emissions actually come from the extraction process itself. Yeah. And where we can lower those emissions, that'll be a big help.
You see LNG still being a driving force for energy users?
Well, you got LNG Canada, that project on the BC coast, which is, there's $40 billion riding on that. So again, the market is moving. They see LNG, and we're producing the best LNG in the world. They see it particularly in Asia as a game changer, just in getting jurisdictions off of coal. And it's making sure that you reach that price point so that countries that are relying on coal and continue to build coal plants, that we can
displace
get the lower emissions, but that we can displace that. Yeah. Now, there are others who will say, you got to be careful with that because they see it kind of as a bridge fuel. And eventually we will get to hydrogen and renewables. But I think, you have to leave it to the marketplace to make those investment decisions, to be honest. But I think government has a very, very important role in providing not just the sticks, but the carrots.
Yeah.
In getting people to lower emissions and finding energy sources that are the lowest emitting that they can find.
In your view, do you see the oil and gas industry dying?
No, not at all. I think that oil is going to be with us for some time. Internal combustion engines, still rely on. Having said that, look, when you look at electric vehicles, they're ramping up. You look at, we're looking at hydrogen, possibly for, in the beginning for 18-wheelers, but eventually, where hydrogen comes in is for transportation that doesn't, you can't plug in all the time. So like boats, big boats that carry containers. There could be hydrogen used there, or planes, but this is a long ways off. Said that, we got to start thinking that way. Even small modular reactors we don't see as being, up and going and contributing to net zero until the latter part of 2050, or the latter, as we get closer to it, that's when it'll come up for 2030 afterwards. We got to hit 2030. We're 9 years away from 2030. The Americans are back in on the Paris Accord. They're already lobbying the Chinese to make the market 2050, not 2060. Although a lot of people think it's amazing that the Chinese moved to 2060 to hit their net zero emissions. And we know from, within our own lifetime that when the Chinese make a decision to head in a particular direction, they move quick.
Yeah.
So I think, for a lot of investors and a lot of governments out there right now, we are still kind of absorbing, especially in this country, still absorbing the difference that this administration is going to be making. They are not only our biggest customer, they are our biggest competitor. So, we got to have eyes on them in a big way,
and just like with like the whole oil and like gas dying, and that's like something we see with the polarization when sometimes we talk to other students and stuff, and so it's just like comments like that come out, and what was like really interesting, so like with that survey we sent out asking students, hey, what would you like to ask Minister O'Regan, and we also asked a few other questions just to see where people, like how knowledgeable they were with all the different sources like hydro, nuclear, oil and gas, and solar, all of them, and geothermal. And it was really interesting that
We're going to need all those things that you mentioned.
Oh, exactly. And so it's that whole mix. And just like how you've been a pretty big vocal champion of our oil and gas sector as well, and that Canada, like you said last spring and then here recently, like oil and gas will not recover without Canadian oil and gas, or Canada will not recover without Canadian oil and gas. And a lot of the students who strongly like supported that were pretty familiar with like all the different technologies and innovations that were advancing of the sector. Like we talked about carbon capture and utilization and storage, and as well as we were seeing the blue hydrogen emerge from our oil reserves too as well, like starting to see some companies buy up licenses so that they can start producing hydrogen. And so like continuing with that, like having that whole mix, a lot of these students also believe that our federal policies have a significant impact on investment in renewables and non-renewables. And they also believe like maybe there's like some unintentional barriers in policy that can limit growth. Is there ways you review your policies when it comes time? Like, are you constantly reviewing them and it's like, oh, well, that was a mistake, and then kind of try to fix it?
I'm on the phone and on Zoom with stakeholders every day. You know, it's imperative that we listen to people, and it's imperative you listen to people on the front lines of the industry. I was on the phone on a call today with a whole bunch of environmental groups who are really interested in our 2 billion trees initiative, which increases our carbon sink. More trees means more carbon dioxide that we can, are sequestered in our trees very efficiently and quite naturally. And so obviously they're very happy that we are doing this 2 billion trees. But they really wanted to get into the minutiae of how we're going to do it, how we're going to stagger the rollout and stuff like that. And some of it gets a bit beyond me, but it's really important that we are challenged by them constantly. And I'm happy to, by the way, Sky, to wear the moniker of being a champion of the industry. But I would also say I'm one of their biggest challengers too. And I do that because, that needs to happen. I am always looking to them to lower emissions more and to invest more in lowering those emissions and investing in people who can help them do that, right? The men and women who work in this industry. But that's good. That's a healthy relationship. That's the relationship that they should have with me as the Minister of Natural Resources. But I am also a champion because, these are the people who built this country. The men and women of our natural resources industries. They are some of the best paid, most technical and challenging jobs in our country. There was a time when people kind of would, say the word hewers of wood and drawers of water like it was a bad thing. It's not anymore. These are technical jobs. And I really, for people who are watching or listening, I really encourage you, if you hadn't thought of it before, to look at these industries, whether it be oil and gas or mining or forestry. This is what built our country. This is how people see our country. We're the best at it. Like, it's our family business. That's what we do in Canada.
There's a student from Dalhousie asking, how do you plan on implementing more renewable energy resources in Canada while still supporting oil and gas industry?
It's an excellent question, but it just describes, it's not an either or thing. It's not, it can't be. And that's, the really, really important thing. I mean, I think we have seen, it's amazing when a lot of it has to do with the Chinese coming on board and then, taking inspiration from the Chinese and that they've been able through manufacturing to lower the costs of things like solar panels. Our technology and things like wind turbines has gotten much better. And incredibly more efficient. We're able to derive more energy more cheaply from solar and wind now than we were able to do. And there are other sources like geothermal that we're looking at, particularly out west, that could be amazing. Yep. But with wind and solar, it's still dependent on wind and sun. And so where we have to really up our game on a number of fronts, but we need to make sure that we always have kind of a base load of power that is consistent so that, you're not relying on the wind and all of a sudden your wind dies down and you're pitch black in your house. Like, we got to be able to run our societies. We got to be able to run our homes, our businesses, our countries. So we got to work on battery technology. In terms of where we're looking at going with battery technology, Canada, there's no country in the world that has more of the mines and metals that we need in order to build these batteries than Canada. So we're good there, and that is a big conversation I will be having with my soon-to-be American colleague once she is confirmed, Jennifer Granholm, who will be the Energy Secretary once confirmed by Congress. The Americans are very big on supply chains on critical minerals, making sure that, because right now China really owns the market.
Yep.
And so for a whole host of national security reasons, we want to have a steady supply ourselves. That's one of the things I'm going to be working on. So we're going to need batteries to lower prices. It's the manufacturing, but we are still going to need baseload power. That is still, some of that is hydro, which is great. We can, we're the third biggest hydroelectric provider in the world.
Yes.
We're the top 10 for solar, wind, and hydro. So
and tier 1 for nuclear. Like there's no other country has a mix that we do. But we are as renewables ramp up, and they will, we are still going to need baseload power, and and there are a number of, whether it be nuclear, that will help us there. Hydro will help us there. EVs are ramping up big time, and I would say within 10 years, everybody probably here is going to own one EV, or they're going to, it's going to, if you choose to, it's going to be very close, and the performance is there. We know that. That's gonna ramp up demand, and so all of these market forces are going to come to play, and the oil and gas industry in this country has faced challenges before and has met the mark, and it will again. Because people are going to need the product for some time, but the market is going to be demanding that it be lower emit, and so that's the market going to be.
Is there anything that you would like to share to the students specifically?
Keep asking questions. You guys are asking great questions. Like these are the questions. If you open your mind and deal with the world as it is, some of these answers present themselves in ways that you may not have thought of. We have to have greater empathy for one another in this country. We're a big country. We're going through a heck of a lot. We're going through a global pandemic and a global economic downturn. The rest of the world still looks at us and thinks that, man, Canada's really got it together. And yet we're always here going,
Canada.
Oh God, we're just
get anything done.
We're perfectionists. It's great. It's why we're the greatest country on earth. We keep holding ourselves up to that standard, that kind of elusive standard of perfection. It's not perfect. We're a big country, different regions, different lands. You spend time with First Nations, Métis, Inuit. They are defined by the land. And the land that they came from, and the land that they inherited, and the land that they will take with them. And in some way, shape, or form, we all are. We are shaped by where we are and where we feel we belong. But we're part of something much greater in this country, all of us together. And we just continue to have open ears and open minds and open hearts. I think most Canadians understand that oil and gas is really important in this country. And they also understand that we got to do something about climate change. Like they do. And yet I would agree, all the dialogue and diatribe that you hear is very polarizing. It confuses people because it kind of goes against that innate great Canadian common sense. That obviously it's somewhere down the middle. And guess what? It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It is somewhere down the middle. And let's work on these answers together because, again, I'm constantly reminded of the people who are directly affected by all this change, the 1,000 people who got pink slips because of KXL. But on the upside, we're working hard on creating, EV manufacturing plants in Canada. We're working hard on carbon capture. We're working hard on creating the technology in this country that will not only lower our emissions, but will lower the world's emissions. We can export this stuff, and live here and thrive here in this country. It's not easy to get there. Nobody said it would be, but everybody else in the world is in the same boat right now. I can tell you. We're just better at it than most. I would argue we're the best.
We wanted, Sky, on behalf of Sky and I and Students for Canada, that we want to just say thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
So we'll come back. I'm happy to.
That was our biggest hope, that you'd be wanting to answer and just chat with us more just about student questions, because we're just blown away that we sent you our letter, and then with your enthusiasm, your teams responded, and we're like, now what do we do?
Dog o'clock apart.
Yeah, we're just like, okay, sweet, let's just dive in and start making this discussion
listen,
happen.
I'll leave you with this. When 25 years ago, when I felt the premier of the day here wasn't paying enough attention to Labrador, where I grew up, I wrote him a one-pager, bullet points on what he should be doing. And I can't believe I did that. Like, come on. I got a phone call saying the premier will fly you down, and I met with him for 45 minutes, and he made me his senior policy advisor. So keep at it.
Yeah. Thank
keep
you.
Asking, keep asking. You won't know unless you ask.
Thank you so much, Ian.
Thank you,
Minister O'Regan. It was great.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Take care of yourselves. Be safe.
You as well.